This was written at the request of the Fellowship of Reconciliation's Hildegard Gosmayer and dedicated by Merton to Joan Baez. It was first published as an FOR pamphlet. This is excerpts from that. It would be a serious mistake to regard Christian nonviolence simply as a novel tactic which is at once efficacious and even edifying, and which enables the sensitive person to participate in the struggles of the world without being dirtied with blood. Nonviolence is not simply a way of proving one's point and getting what one wants without being involved in behavior that one considers ugly and evil. Nor is it, for that matter, a means which anyone legitimately can make use of according to his fancy for any purpose whatever. To practice nonviolence for a purely selfish or arbitrary end would, in fact, discredit and distort the truth of nonviolent resistance. Nonviolence is perhaps the most exacting of all forms of struggle, not only because it demands, first of all, that one be ready to suffer evil and even face the threat of death without violent retaliation, but because it excludes mere transient self-interest from its considerations. In a very real sense, those who practice nonviolent resistance must commit themselves not to the defense of their own interests, or even those of a particular group. They must commit themselves to the defense of objective truth and right, and above all, of human beings. Their aim is then not simply to prevail or to prove that they are right and the adversary wrong, or to make the adversary give in and yield to what is demanded. Nor should violent resistors be content to prove to themselves that they are virtuous and right, that their hands and heart are pure, even though the adversaries may be evil and defiled. Still less should they seek for themselves the psychological gratification of upsetting the adversary's conscience and perhaps driving him to an act of bad faith and refusal of the truth. We know that our unconscious motives may at times make our nonviolence a form of moral aggression and even a subtle provocation designed without our awareness to bring out the evil we hope to find in the adversary, and thus to justify ourselves in our own eyes and in the eyes of decent people. Christian nonviolence is not built on a presupposed division, but on the basic unity of humankind. It is not out for the conversion of the wicked to the ideas of the good, but for healing and reconciliation. Nonviolence must be aimed above all at the transformation of the present state of the world, and it must therefore be free from all occult, unconscious connivance with an unjust use of power. This poses enormous problems, for if nonviolence is too political, it becomes drawn into the power struggle and identified with one side or another of that struggle, while if it is totally apolitical, it runs the risk of being ineffective or at best merely symbolic. Perhaps the most insidious temptation to be avoided is one which is characteristic of the power structure itself, this fetishism of immediate visible results. Modern society understands possibilities and results in terms of a superficial and quantitative idea of efficacy. One of the missions of Christian nonviolence is to restore a different standard of practical judgment in social conflicts. This means that the Christian humility of nonviolent action must establish itself in the minds and memories of modern people, not only as conceivable and possible, but as a desired alternative to what they now consider the only realistic possibility, namely political technique backed by force. Here, the human dignity of nonviolence must manifest itself clearly in terms of a freedom and a nobility which are able to resist political manipulation and brute force and show them up as arbitrary, barbarous, and irrational. This will not be easy. The temptation to get publicity and quick results by spectacular tricks or by forms of protest that are merely odd and provocative, but whose human meaning is not clear, may defeat this purpose. The realism of nonviolence must be made evident by humility and self-restraint, which clearly show frankness and open-mindedness, and invite the adversary to serious and reasonable discussion. Instead of trying to use the adversary as leverage for one's own effort to realize an ideal, nonviolence seeks only to enter into a dialogue with them in order to attain together with them the common good of everyone. Nonviolence must be realistic and concrete. Like ordinary political action, it is no more than the art of the possible. But precisely the advantage of nonviolence is that it has a more Christian and more humane notion of what is possible. Where the powerful believe that only power is efficacious, the nonviolent resistor is persuaded of the superior efficacy of love, peace, openness, peaceful negotiation, and above all of truth, for power can guarantee the interests of some, but it never can foster the good of all. Power always protects the good of some at the expense of others. Only love can attain and preserve the good of all. Any claim to build the security of all on force is a manifest imposure. It is here that genuine humility is of greatest importance. The dread of being open to the ideas of others generally comes from our hidden insecurity about our own convictions. We fear that we may be converted or perverted by a pernicious doctrine. On the other hand, if we are mature and objective in our open-mindedness, we may find that viewing things from a basically different perspective, that of our adversary, we discover our own truth in a new light and are able to understand our own ideal more realistically. Our willingness to take an alternative approach to a problem will perhaps relax the obsessive fixation of the adversary on their view, which they believe is the only reasonable possibility and which they are determined to impose on everybody else by coercion. Christian hope and Christian humility are inseparable. The quality of nonviolence is decided largely by the purity of the Christian hope behind it. The Christian knows that there are radically sound possibilities in everyone and believes that love and grace will always have the power to bring on those possibilities at the most unexpected moments. Therefore, if one has hopes that God will grant peace to the world, it is because one also trusts that humanity, God's creature, is not basically evil, that there is in us a potentiality for peace and order which can be realized provided the right conditions are there. Christians will do their part in creating these conditions by preferring love and true trust to hate and suspiciousness. Obviously, once again, this hope in humankind must not be naive, but experience itself has shown in the last few years how much an attitude of simplicity and openness can do to break down barriers of suspicion that had divided people for centuries.